Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you today. It's a Wednesday, which is weird. I don't think we've ever done this on a Wednesday. We've done Mondays and Thursdays. Wednesday might be a new one. So, welcome to history.
Yeah.
It is historical being here on a Wednesday afternoon. I am Pastor Jack, and this is
Pastor Matt.
And we're doing deleted scenes today. And so that's where we dig deeper into the most recent sermon from the past Sunday. And so today we are talking more about Mary of Bethany and her story and kind of some of the things that went on within that story. And so,
full confession, I was not really expecting to have a lot for deleted scenes this time. And I was really impressed with the questions that you came up with because there's a lot more to say than I guess I didn't really just think about it. So yeah. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
This week was harder for me to develop questions because last week, like I said, they kind of wrote themselves.
Yeah.
But this week, I think there's some very interesting things that we're talking about. And so
I talked to my brother last night, and he said that my sermon on the Transfiguration was good, but it was about 9 hours too short.
Yeah.
It's because of all the stuff that was left out.
Yeah.
This
and
one, not so much.
That means deleted scenes last week was 8.5 hours too short.
Right.
We only went for like a half an hour on that.
But it was pretty dense.
So yeah. So the way this is going to work, I have some questions for Pastor Matt, and I'm going to ask him those, and then he's going to answer them. You also can ask your questions in the comments section of either Facebook or YouTube, whatever your viewing platform is, and we will get to those as soon as we can. So that's really what it looks like, just question and answers. So,
and my apologies if you were if this is Thursday and you thought we were going to be live on Thursday and you missed the chance to ask us questions. I apologize. That's my fault. I forgot. I scheduled it on Thursday like normal. I forgot that it was going to be on Wednesday. So I apologize. And if you had any questions you really wanted to ask about this, feel free to comment them later and we'll follow up with them.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to get into the questions now. And so my first question is kind of a two-parter here. You kind of talked about this idea of this meal possibly being kind of a closed-door meal because they wanted to protect Jesus and knew that he was a controversial character at that point, and people were looking for him. And so I want to ask, were they taking any other precautions other than maybe just having a closed-door meal with Jesus, or are they just kind of following him saying he's going to do what he's going to do and we just kind of have to deal with what happens afterwards? Like, are they taking more precautions than this?
So I think it's for the disciples, it's definitely more the latter, that they're just following Jesus around. And I don't think they recognize the danger, but I don't think they are worried about it because they trust that Jesus is the Messiah and he's just going to, take names and he's not in danger. However, at least one of them, though, is aware of it because when Jesus decides to go to Lazarus, Thomas says, well, let's go with him and die with him. So Thomas has some sense that they're going into danger, but all he can say is, all right, well, I guess if that's where he's going, we'll go and we'll die with him.
Yeah.
What's interesting, though, is when you read in the Gospels, the evidence indicates while the disciples didn't take steps to protect Jesus, Jesus seems to have taken steps to protect himself. Obviously, Jesus intended to die in Jerusalem, but it was important that he die under the right circumstances and after he had accomplished certain things first. So there's evidence in the Gospels, specifically Mark, that he planned things ahead of time in a way to make sure that the leaders didn't catch him before he had done two important things. The first one is getting into Jerusalem, because there's this really interesting thing it's kind of weird and hard to explain, the way he gets the colt, the donkey that he rides into town. And what Mark tells us is Jesus told them, go into the village ahead of you. As soon as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, why are you doing this? Say, the Lord needs it and we'll send it back here right away. So they went and found a colt outside in the street tied by a door. They untied it, and some of those standing there said to them, what are you doing untying that colt? They answered them just as Jesus had said, so they let them go. Well, the story is kind of weird because Jesus says, go there, find this colt, bring it back. How did he know there was going to be a colt there? Well, it could be that Jesus is the Messiah and he has, supernatural premonition. But the question is, why do these people these people watch these strangers come up and ask for the colt, and all they say is the Lord needs it and will send it back, and that's okay?
Yeah.
What it seems to indicate is that they had prearranged this so that they could get the colt in a way. It's almost like a secret spy password kind of a thing. Like they're trying to make sure that nobody knows what's going on so that people aren't prepared for it. Possibly because Jesus knows Judas is going to betray him and doesn't want Judas to know when or where he's going to be. The same thing then happens when they're preparing for the Last Supper. It says, so he sent 2 of his disciples and told them, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Wherever he enters, tell the owner of the house, the teacher says, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there. Now, on the one hand, normally the way you explain this is, the way many of us think is, well, Jesus just knew this was going to happen, and so he sent his disciples there. But the language actually makes it sound like it's been arranged to happen, so that they already know who the teacher is. And it says the guy carrying the jar will meet them. It's it's a lot like a spy story where like they'll say, I'll be there with the red carnation, something to make them stand out.
Yeah.
A man holding a jar is an unusual thing. That was women's work. So it's like, I'll be the guy there with the jar and send your disciples to find me. And that way, when Jesus gives the instructions to the disciples, nobody knows the actual building they're going to. So if Judas overhears it, he doesn't. All he knows is how to find the person they're meeting. He doesn't know where they're going to go, so he can't tell the priests where they're having the meal.
Yeah.
And so Jesus does seem to take precautions so that he isn't caught until the right time. And I guess the last one would be the fact that he stays in Bethany, not Jerusalem, during the week. Jesus is very careful that the only time they'll ever be able to catch him in Jerusalem without a crowd around is in Gethsemane. Yeah.
Thanks for that answer.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting anything particular, so it's interesting to find out. So kind of the second part of this question is, what about other people in context of the Gospels? How are they maybe being protected? Like, are there other people mentioned or not mentioned to be protected? Right,
yeah. So we talked about how Mary of Bethany is not named in the Gospel of Mark because what she was doing made her an accomplice to Jesus's mission. Well, it's interesting that when you look at Mark, there's several people in there who are anonymous. Like basically everybody who does something that would make them an accomplice is anonymous. We've already actually mentioned a couple. We don't know who it was that owned the donkey. That's anonymous. And it just says there were some bystanders there. Why would the bystanders care about the donkey? Well, it's probably the people there. So they're protecting the identity of the person who provided the colt. They protect the identity of the woman who anoints him. We are not told who hosts the Last Supper, which, if you remember, I think it's the person who wrote the Gospel of John. Yeah. But whoever it is, they're not named. When Peter cuts off the servant's ear, we're going to talk about this next week because we're going to talk about next Sunday because the servant is one of the people we're going to talk about. When Peter cuts off the high priest's servant's ear in Gethsemane, the Gospels don't name the servant, but they also don't tell you which follower of Jesus cuts off the ear. And then there's one person in the garden that there's this weird thing where it says there was a man there and they tried to arrest him and they grabbed his cloak and it came off and he ran away naked. And that's it. You're like, well, why is that in there? Some people think that that's Mark. I don't know if that's Mark, but the important thing is he's not named because he resisted arrest.
Yeah.
So actually during that week, every single person who takes action on Jesus' behalf or is part that could be tied to what he's doing and could be prosecuted for it is anonymous. So the Gospel of Mark does seem to be protecting people, and what that also tells us is it helps reassure us that the Gospel of Mark comes from very early testimony because it was done while they were still in danger, which would have been the first 10, 15 years after the resurrection. Before it once it blew out of Jerusalem, then they couldn't really control it anymore, and it would have been less danger. So very early testimony.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I like watching some of these Netflix, crime documentaries and stuff like that. And just interesting seeing how someone was protecting, other people's identity and stuff like that, So.
Yeah, like you could put on there, that classic disclaimer, like names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Yeah,
names
voices,
have been withheld. Yeah,
their voices have been changed and stuff like that.
Yep.
So
that's what they were doing.
One question I have for you, and don't forget you can comment any questions that you might have for Pastor Matt, is you kind of talk about how Mary had figured out and believed what Jesus was saying. Why hadn't other people figured it out? And even to the point where after Jesus is crucified, people still haven't really figured out who he is. And, we're going to talk about later in this sermon series, just about, these guys who are kind of chatting about this situation, who think Jesus is kind of just a prophet who now died. How come people just weren't able to figure it out? Or maybe were they denying it in some way? And
I think that it's because they had very definite expectations of what the Messiah was going to do, and what Jesus didn't fit with those expectations. And so it was kind of like I mentioned when Peter rebukes Jesus. I think it's because, and I actually made a vague quotation of George Patton, the World War II general. He said, "I don't want any of you dying for your country. No one ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other guy die for his country." Like that's how you win wars, by killing. And there are a lot of references in the Old Testament to the wrath of God and these battles that will take place and things like that. And so it's just nobody really had categories for what Jesus was talking about. And one of the things we'll say now is, why didn't they understand? Because it's in the Old Testament. Like this Sunday, we're going to look at 3 different passages where Jesus' death on the cross is described before it happened. But the thing is, in those days, people weren't clear that the person who dies on behalf of the nation and the Messiah were the same person. They weren't sure. Now, to the disciples' credit, I think that we still struggle with this. And I don't know if we've talked about this in Deleted Scenes before, but Christians today still struggle with that. A lot of times what we want to do is we want to define Jesus as the rider on the white horse who's going to come down and bring justice at the end of time. And we think that's the real Jesus. And so we still kind of deny that Jesus is the one who ultimately deals with evil by dying. We want to think of him like in the Left Behind series, in the very last book, Jesus comes down and he starts talking to the Israelite, or to the Christians who are holed up in their city, and at every word he speaks to them, soldiers that are attacking the city get split open all the way down, and there's just all this blood and gore and diseases and Jesus is doing all of this. And there's a degree to which we still kind of think, well, that's Jesus. Yeah, that's who he's going to be. And the first coming was just kind of just to prove he could do it go to the cross, but really he's going to come down and kill people. Yeah.
Maybe if that was their kind of mentality, they would have thought, when he goes to the cross, he would have maybe deserved it in a sense, in the way where he's brought justice and he's killed people for his nation, and so them putting him on the cross is like, it makes sense because he's done it. Whereas when he goes to the cross now, everyone's saying he doesn't deserve this. Like this doesn't make any sense. He hasn't done anything wrong. Yeah. Why is he going to the cross? And so maybe that's also where their mind was at a little bit. Like maybe that's just a complete inference on my part. That's just me thinking. But
well, and to be fair, Jesus also uses a lot of symbolism and parables when he teaches. So. I could see how it might not be clear to them when they come out until they come out the other side, how much of this is literal and how much of it is parable or figurative. Yeah. We struggle with that. And so a lot of times you just can't see how scripture fits together until you're on the other end of it.
Yep, exactly. It's difficult to figure Jesus out sometimes. Yes. Actually, kind of all the time, Jesus is interesting character to say the least.
Yeah, there's definitely always more to what he's doing than we can see.
Yeah. And what's so exciting to find out sometimes is how what he's doing connects to different parts of the Gospels or even the New Testament or the Old Testament, and saying, "Whoa, this is a lot deep." Like, even though I realize this is deeper than what's probably just going on here, it's even deeper than the deepness that I thought I was underestimating. So
yeah, yep.
Anyway, so my next question for you is this event of Mary anointing Jesus, and I just kind of I got curious. Was this event was it for Jesus? Was it for Mary and her faith? Was it for the people around them, or was it for someone completely different, or was it just kind of something that happened that was beautiful and recorded? Like, who was it really for, or was Jesus doing it for a specific reason, or did he just kind of allow it to happen?
Well, Jesus doesn't do it. It happens to Jesus. Mm-hmm. Whether he knew it was going to happen or how much he knew, we don't know. And speculating about Jesus' mind is always perilous. But I think my answer would be yes.
Yeah.
I think that it happened for Jesus, just the same way that the Transfiguration. Peter says that the Transfiguration happened for Jesus, and the baptism. There are different points when God just not reassures, but encourages, supports Jesus in a particular moment. The baptism, the Transfiguration, in the Garden of Gethsemane, God is going to send angels to minister to him. And I think I could see that in this moment, that is something that is ministering to Jesus. It was a very compassionate, loving act, and I could see how that would minister to Jesus. I think it would also be valuable to Mary. Like I was talking about in the sermon, I have to imagine that was a help to her after Jesus died, to know that was the last thing she did for him. And then obviously Jesus rises from the dead, and so the people who didn't do something for Jesus, their guilt might have been, they might not have felt as guilty when he comes back to life.
Yeah.
But I would think that Mary would always value the fact that she was able to do that for Jesus.
Sure.
But also, there's the dynamic of it's something that should happen if Jesus is the Messiah. She actually, you could argue in a way, Mary's the one who makes him the Messiah. Because Messiah means anointed one.
Yeah.
And that's when he became anointed. And that's why I didn't say it in the first service. In the second service, I said, if Jesus is David, then Mary is Samuel. That is an important thing that has to happen for a legitimate Messiah to be anointed. And so there's also, it's for Jesus, it's for Mary, and it's just something that has to happen.
Yeah.
So it's a very powerful moment when you understand the role it plays in the story.
Yeah, it is, definitely. You might kind of mention this idea of, it was done out of love for Jesus, and how that might have been a comforting thing for Mary to know. And I just want to ask you, what might be something that we could do similar to what Mary did, that would show love for Jesus? Or should we even do something similar, with this $50,000 perfume jar? What does this look like for us to somehow show love for Jesus in our life?
So I think that's a good question, because this is a story, it's not quite to the same level, but it's similar to when God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And the question is, how does this carry over? There was a theologian that I wrote my thesis on, Soren Kierkegaard. He talked about how preachers might not preach on this because they're worried that the people in their churches might then say, hey, I'm supposed to go sacrifice my kid. How do you emulate this story? Well, it's because the thing there is Abraham has a very special relationship with God. So unless you have a covenant with God that involves a special child, God's not going to be having those kind of conversations with you, right? You're just not eligible. And the danger that we might run into with the story of Mary is then we might use it to justify exorbitant spending on Jesus that is different than spending it on the needy. So we might use that justification to build expensive cathedrals and to wear expensive clothes at church, and apparently there's a Twitter feed that's all about pastors wearing designer clothes. I think you showed it to me, and then my dad sent me an article.
I follow this Instagram page called Preachers in Sneaks.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So, yeah, and it's just about them wearing fancy shoes and stuff. And
right.
It's interesting. I don't follow it for any specific reason other than it's just like, wow, that's interesting that they're wearing that or something.
Yeah.
Or they spent that much money on shoes.
Right.
So.
Which I feel like I should say, because I know I tend to be dressed up a bit more. I definitely buy my clothes like as cheaply as possible.
Yeah.
Yep. None of mine is designer. But where was I going with that? It would be wrong to use this passage to justify that kind of thing where because Mary spent $50,000 on perfume for Jesus, we should spend $50,000 on like an ornate cross or altar or something like that. Because this is a very situational specific thing. Mm-hmm. Jesus is about to die. That's why it's good that she did this. And the implication seems to be that if he wasn't about to die, then the disciples' criticism would have been accurate. Mm-hmm. Because Jesus does say, what you do for the least of these, you do for me. So I think it would be wrong for us to use this passage to say we should love Jesus distinctly from helping others. Mm-hmm. The way we allocate our funds and the resources God has given us, the best way to love Jesus is to give them to those who need and those who are helping those in need. So we give directly to people who need things. We give to organizations who need things. Hopefully our churches are passing along those resources to people who need things. I would say that's the way that we love Jesus.
Yeah.
Is we're in the phase where Jesus is no longer here, but the poor still are.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's a long answer to get to that point.
Don't forget, you can comment any questions for Pastor Matt that you might have, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. We're paying attention to both. So my next question here is a little bit more of maybe a simpler one, just in general. Because you kind of talk about all this anointing for burial and all these things. What does a tomb actually look like? Because I have a friend who kind of, maybe not that they hate the term or think that people should do away with it or it should be gone from Christianity, but sometimes the term burial doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in the context of Jesus because he was put in a tomb as opposed to like buried underground the way we would think of it. So what does a tomb actually look like for that Jesus would have been buried in, maybe?
So it would have been carved into a hillside. It would have been a cave. And it would have had a slab or a couple of slabs. And the idea is that you would take a body and you would lay it on the slab and you would let it decompose. And then later you would come in and collect the bones and put them in a box. And so you would store the bones in boxes. Mm-hmm. So like when they excavate tombs now, they don't find bodies on slabs. They find boxes of bones. And the slab was just a place. So then the next person in the family who dies, you put them on the slab, they decompose. As far as and then there's a big stone that rolls in front of it. That I should have read up on it. I don't know if that's normal or if that was specifically to seal Jesus in because they were concerned about it being robbed. But I think that's common to avoid grave robbers. Yeah. I think so. As far as your friend's concerned about the word burial, I think that's just an overly narrow definition of the word burial. Yeah. Because burial is the accurate term for when you lay a body to rest. So, like, if you bury a body in an ossuary, mainly you see this in movies. I've never actually seen somebody who's buried in a mausoleum, where they have they have shells almost, that's burial. Mm-hmm. We just typically bury people in the ground, and so we consider burial to be like you were buried under, stuff. Yeah. But bury is the accurate word for depositing a body in a tomb. All
right. Next question. Sorry, I lost my spot. There we go. Are we blinded a bit by how safe it is for us as Christians in the United States?
Absolutely. We are in the extreme minority of followers of Christ in terms of how safe it is for us to follow Jesus. And that's why I always kind of push back when people talk about like Christians being persecuted in America today. We are nowhere near being persecuted today. Mm-hmm. We are. I mean, in terms of the different belief systems that are present in America, we have the most privilege. And so if we're being persecuted, then we're definitely persecuting Muslims and Jews
Mm-hmm.
and just all the other belief systems who have less prominence in America than us. We're not being persecuted. There is no danger to being a Christian in America. And I do think that that separates us a bit from the reality of what it means to follow Jesus, because it doesn't have to cost us anything.
Yeah.
We have so many ways to safely be Christians, to go to church regularly and make no more impression than the dent in the chair. To not have to sacrifice anything. I think it's not just because Christianity is not persecuted in America, but it's also because we have reshaped Christianity to mean things that it doesn't actually mean in order to make it safe. We've domesticated Christianity so that it can be just something you do on Sundays. It can be something that is compatible with our nationality and our political system and our economy. And the early Christians, when they became a Christian, it affected the way their businesses. It affected their political status. It affected everything about them. And for the majority of Christians throughout history, that's been the case.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'd say that we really just don't understand what it actually means to be a Christian in large degree. And I put myself in that category because being a Christian hasn't really cost me very much.
Yeah. Kind of going along with that, you kind of talked about how, we haven't really seen the sacrifices or the cost of what other Christians might have. How do we kind of maybe not force ourselves to be put into those situations, but how do we see our faith become something where we are sacrificing something? Kind of going along with this last point, when the world encounters Jesus most clearly when Christians willingly share the sacrifices and dangers of his calling, what does that look like for us as Americans if these sacrifices and costs aren't really what they might be elsewhere?
I don't think that we have to be persecuted to sacrifice or suffer for Christ. Mary wasn't. She didn't endure persecution. She put herself in danger. We don't know that she was ever actually arrested or anything like that, but she did spend $50,000 on Jesus. Mm-hmm. I think one of the hardest things for Americans to accept, and one of the things we've kind of glossed over, is the fact that being a Christian is supposed to affect how you spend your money. And the Bible is pretty clear that God, he does, there are wealthy Christians in the New Testament, but it's very specific. I'm pretty sure it's in James. I'm not thinking of the verse, but I can find it. The reason he gives them wealth is so they can use wealth for the kingdom. So following Mary's example, that would mean that the kingdom is part of our budget. And this, I'm preaching to myself right now, that if the kingdom is not part of my budget, then I'm not sacrificing, and that doesn't just mean budgeting 10% to your church. That would mean we're getting a tax rebate, and Casey and I are talking about, we're just being given this money. I'm sorry, we're getting the money for the stimulus.
The stimmy?
Yeah, and we're being given this money, and the way we spend it should reflect God. So we need to find some ways to give it, which means less material things for us.
Yeah,
it could even get to the point of being less financial security if you give enough. And for a lot of us, the idea that we would give away so much money that we're not financially secure seems silly.
Yeah.
But there's nothing in Scripture that says that that's not something we might be called to do.
Definitely. So don't forget, we're coming up on our last couple questions here that you can comment any questions that you might have. So with all this sacrifice and danger talk, this topic seems a little gloomy in some ways, maybe a little bit negative in some ways. Where is the hope in all of this, subject of sacrificing and joining in on the sacrifice and dangers of Jesus's calling and therefore our calling? Where is the hope in this story?
I think I would answer that in two ways, and the first one may seem critical, but it's not. To be honest, I would say that if it feels gloomy to us, to a certain degree, that's because we're only thinking about ourselves. Because if we're sacrificing for the sake of other people, it's a cost to us, but it's a benefit to others. And to say that that's dark, I know it feels dark because our instincts and our appetites are inwardly focused, and we can't actually change that. We just change how we respond to them.
Yeah.
So for it to feel gloomy, I understand. But for us to conclude that it's gloomy and negative is to be focused only on how it affects me. Because it's actually if I give to people who are in need, it's actually very good for them. And it's better, how good it is for them outweighs how bad it is for me. But on the other hand, the other side of that answer would be that the hope comes in the resurrection. Because I'll be honest, this week's sermon is going to be darker. Mm-hmm. Because now we're actually going to be at the foot of the cross. We're going to see Jesus die, and we're going to look that suffering and sacrifice in the face. And there are ways in which that is darker.
Yeah.
But it always leads to Easter. It always leads to resurrection. And so the hope is that we trust in God that the sacrificing is worth it, that the sacrificing will accomplish good and will accomplish God's will.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going. And I've been thinking about this, about how kind of, I don't know, dark the last sermon and this sermon and some of the sermons in this series have been, are just serious. And to a certain degree, I think we need to hear that.
Yeah. Because
often we preach nothing but victory, and as if every moment of being a Christian is supposed to feel like a victory. And every moment of being a Christian is a victory because Jesus won the victory, but it doesn't always feel like it.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I think all of us kind of struggle with at some point. It's just, how do we handle the balance here between, talking about the realities and the truths of what happened to Jesus. And there's this worship song that I really like, called Death Was Arrested. And there's a point in the song where it gets really quiet and it goes kind of off, and the words are, darkness rejoiced as though heaven had lost. And then it just goes absolutely quiet. And if you watch the music video of them performing it, everything goes black. And then all of a sudden, but then Jesus arose and it just picks back up and it's just really bright. And it's like, that's what it feels like to go through this story and through, I think, this week. It all just kind of goes off and everything seems so dark. Because even for people in the time, they say, seems like darkness is winning right now. It seems like, Satan's winning because Jesus just died. But then when you realize what's coming and what actually happens, Jesus conquers death. Like, that is the ultimate rejoicing time. And so I think talking about this really helps put into perspective how amazing and cool it is that what Jesus did. So
my favorite Easter hymn is a little like that. Like, as much as a hymn could be like that. Christ arose. The verse, lo in the grave he lay, Jesus my Savior, waiting the coming day. Mm-hmm. Jesus. And then I love the chorus because it's that comparison of he's in the grave, now he arose.
Yep.
And how about this for a little gift for the people that actually watched deleted scenes? I'm really excited. Another song that you can do that with is Were You There? Because the first 3 verses are about the death, and then the last verse, when you sing it, is about the resurrection if you sing it on Easter. And I'm really excited because we are going to be singing both of those songs on Easter, because of the way the availability of the vaccine and just the way some different things have changed. We feel like it's safe to begin singing again. And so I'm really excited to be singing with people on Easter Sunday. Seems like a good day to rejoice like that. So, woo!
This will kind of, in a normal way, be my first time singing with the congregation as an employee here. So that's fun. Yeah. I've sang over at the Pioneer and things like that, but never in service. So as I've been employed here, I came once or twice before COVID. But that was pre-employment, so anyway,
over a year ago. That was January,
so long ago.
Whole other world.
I have one more question for you. It's kind of the random question, and so this is your time to comment any questions that you might have for Pastor Matt, and if you don't make it in time, then comment it later. My last question comes from something you mentioned in the sermon that kind of made me chuckle a little bit, because I've heard you talk about this before, and it has to do with children's Bibles.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you, how important do you think it is for kids' Bibles to be completely accurate and for parents to be picky about which Bibles they choose for their kids?
So I will. There are we have quite a few Bibles. We were given kids' Bibles for both baby showers, and I appreciate all of them. And I have never like thrown away or discarded a children's Bible because it skips a story or tells it badly.
Sure.
I think, especially like the one that I dislike the most is James's favorite. So I would rather he read that and be looking at Bible pictures and stuff than to say no because the theology and frankly the poetry and the grammar is bad. I do think there's a point at which you do need, I mean, at a certain point you need to start telling kids the full story. And I feel like for me, in my experience, that happened later than I wish it would have. But that was more about Sunday school and Awana than it was about children's Bibles. Mm-hmm. So it's not that important. It just, as a person whose job it is to read the Bible and to tell the story of the Bible and to teach the full message, it bugs me.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, you know, if you ask a musician about like kids' music and the arrangements of kids' songs, like they probably say, professionally, I hate this, but my kid likes it, so we'll listen to it a dozen more times.
Yeah. There seems to be a lot of these types of things just within the church, you know, because bringing up worship music made me think about how there's a lot of worship songs where, you know, pastors or whomever are going to be like, that theology is a little bit interesting and how they worded that, you know? And so then it's like, it causes you, well, do you sing this with your congregation? Do you listen to this as, you know, in your personal listening time? And that gets a bit tricky too sometimes.
Yeah, I think now the one difference between the worship songs and the kids' books is I think that we have to be more careful about worship songs because they do have a tendency to form our theology. Yeah. But I think we can overestimate that power. And again, I think this is my go-to example. So I probably mentioned it on Deleted Scenes before, but there's a song that omits the resurrection. Mm-hmm. It's actually a pretty significant heresy if you take it completely at face value. And now I'm trying to remember the song. Come on, Lord, I lift your name on high. Oh, yeah. The chorus is, He came from heaven to earth to show the way. From the earth to the cross, my debt to pay. From the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. That's a heresy, technically, because it's from the grave to the earth to the sky. If you go straight to the sky, it's not resurrection. Yeah. It's just like lots of people believe that your spirit went to heaven when you died. Yeah. Greeks believed that. It was resurrection is you go to the earth and then to heaven. Now, I can make a big deal about that. And I remember just hating that song when someone pointed that out to me in seminary. But I don't think anybody has ever actually listened to that song and concluded, oh, Jesus didn't actually rise from the dead. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like, and I remember someone making a big deal about a song from, I think it's that Pentecostal church that has the big worship ministry. Bethel. Yeah. And it's a song about Jesus being the Lion of Judah. And I remember hearing a speaker talk about how, no, God is the Lion of Judah. And they're doing oneness theology where God isn't three persons. He's one person in playing three roles, which first of all is real hair splitting when it comes to Trinitarian doctrine. Yeah. If you don't understand the difference, that's okay. It's like I said, it's real hair splitting. Uh-huh. But then I thought, does anybody actually go away from that song like not believing in the Trinity? I don't think we're thinking about it that much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's a lot within this category, and we've I think overstayed our welcome here.
And you saying I talked too long?
Yeah. Well, we talked too long. Okay. I mean, I enjoy this topic of, you know, theology and worship music and children's Bibles. I think it's exciting and fun. But we don't want to keep you here forever. Yeah. So join it. Wait, we're not doing it next week, correct?
We're actually taking 2 weeks off.
2 weeks off.
Because next week is Holy Week, and we have 5 services next week. And
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Deleted Scenes just is not going to happen, I don't think. And then the week after that, I'm on vacation.
Yeah.
Out of town.
Yep.
And I'm not calling in.
Okay.
I need a week off.
Okay.
So maybe we'll do like a big one when we come back. We'll just do like a 3-hour deleted scenes to cover all 3 of them. Or maybe we'll just focus on your sermon.
Or maybe we'll do something fun in general. Just like, I don't want to eat hot wings again, but just do something fun.
I think we should eat hot wings again. I enjoyed that. That was fun.
I was not able to focus that entire time. Because what was weird was the first time it seemed like, I mean, I wouldn't say I handled it better, but I was like, oh, these taste pretty good. And they're not that spicy, right? And, you were sweating a little bit and stuff. And I was like, oh, these are kind of hot. And then the second time I was like, I just could not focus and I was dying. And you were like, let's talk about theology. And I was like, theology is the furthest thing from my mind right now. I only have ghost pepper wings on my mind right now. So
I was like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace.
Yeah.
I was just supernaturally protected from the heat.
I guess so. And apparently I was left out from that.
Yeah. Well, you weren't answering the questions. That's why we need to do it when you're answering questions.
But I was asking the questions.
Well, I know, but you don't have to think. You just have to read those.
Think about it. You have no questions to answer if I don't ask them.
No, I know. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm saying that you don't have to think on the fly as much.
That's fair.
So maybe we should do it again and with you answering the questions and see if God protects you from the
That
spice.
sounds like a bad idea. I'm not here for
That's
that
what
idea.
I'm excited about.
Maybe we should chug a gallon of water and see how that goes. Because last time I did that, I threw up. So
I've heard that's a thing that people do. Yeah.
Because it was part of the amazing race at the OCC when I was in high school. Was you had to go to the bonfire and chug a gallon of water, and you could do it as a whole group. But I was like, I'll just do it, and then I did it, and then as soon as I was leaving, all over the grass. Anyway, you probably didn't need to know that, but now you do.
Speaking of overstaying our welcome.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so not next week, not the week after, but then the week after. I think a Thursday. We'll keep you up to date on Facebook about it.
Yes.
We'll announce it. So.
Yep.
All right. It's been a pleasure. Hey, spend Holy Week with us. We'd love to see you at like all of our services.
Yeah. Palm Sunday. Then we have the family service that you come here for at 6:30. Then we've got Maundy Thursday is at 7 on Thursday, here or online. So yes, physically here or electronically here where you're at. Good Friday is at 7.
Yes.
And then there's the Easter egg hunt on Saturday morning, 10 to 12. It's open house. And then we have Easter at 6:30 is the sunrise service. And then our regular service is at 8:30 and 10:45. And 10:45 is our online service.
I feel like that's 8 services. Or is it 7?
It's a lot.
It's a lot of services.
Yeah.
Either way, fellowship.
Yes.
And, spend it with us. We'd love to have you. So.
Yep.
I'm not going to keep talking because I have lost words. So,
stay healthy, stay hopeful, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
I was just going to say our names again.
Yeah.
I'm Pastor Jack.
I'm Pastor Matt. We will see you later.